Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So does strategy shape structure or does structure shape strategy? It's a classic debate, but in practice, most organizations struggle to align the two and end up with a structure that drags against the strategy or a strategy that ignores how the organization really works. Today's guest is the pioneering Rupert Morrison, who has spent his career helping organizations close that gap with data, clarity, and precision. Now, Rupert is the most requested guest by our own podcast guests, which tells you just how much esteem he's held in across the organization design and development world. As the founder of OrgView and Arahi and author of the groundbreaking books such as Data-Driven Organization Design and Strategic Value Creation, Rupert has helped leaders around the world rethink how they connect people, strategy, and structure. Rupert is described as an entrepreneur, economist, and visionary, and he started life on a sheep station in New Zealand and began his career in management consultant focusing on supply chain, organization design, and transformation, where he worked with many of the world's largest companies in multiple sectors. This led him to found his own software solutions company, Concentra Analytics, in 2008, and the rest is history, launching OrgView, an organization design planning platform, which became one of the fastest growing tech companies in the UK, securing $62 million in funding. And I've seen actual org designers get gooey-eyed describing OrgView and how much has actually changed their world. After the global success of OrgView, he wanted to take on his next challenge, strategy. So he founded Arahi with John Andrew while still remaining on the board of Concentra. Arahi is a platform to help organizations design, execute, and track strategy. He's married with 3 sons in London. He's a rugby fanatic and an Ironman competitor, and he's never happier than when he's on the rugby field coaching his 3 kids. So Rupert, you're an intensely busy man. You're going away on holiday on Friday, and you've made time for us. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you with us, and we've thoroughly enjoyed your books. So highly recommend them. Yeah,
oh, amazing.
That's my process for reading and then coming to a podcast. Lots of post-it notes. So
makes it all worthwhile. When you write a book, you half the time you think, is anyone actually going to read this? So it's to even have one person read it is just a great thing. So no, thank you.
Fab. I think there's lots we could talk to. We've got so many things we could talk about, and so many questions it prompted for us. But I thought if we start with the strategy space, just to kick us off, kind of that word strategy gets used a lot. You know, you talk to a lot of people. A lot of people have got different definitions and different meanings. It might have lost its way a little bit. What's your definition? How do you define strategy?
So strategy's totally lost its way. It's used everyday vernacular. And it's become meaningless. So people say, let's have a strategic conversation and do strategic planning, which is a misnomer. And then, this is a strategic conversation around a strategic topic. Well, that was a strategic. So it's just used. And so it's lost all meaning, really. And it has almost no meaning in most businesses. Mm-hmm. So one of the main reasons for focusing on strategy, and I will get to definition in a second, but and answer at least some of your questions. But a big reason for getting into it is when I was doing org design, the first question you ask is, what's your strategy? Because you can't design an organization without a strategy. And pretty much every time, no one has a strategy. They just have a list of aspirations. So it's useful to define what strategy isn't first. It isn't, I want to be number one in this market. It isn't a goal. It isn't a plan. It isn't a set of steps. We do X and then Y and then Z. It's an integrated system that is actually very outward facing. So there's a definition from Martin. The simplest definition is where to compete and how to win. So where are you competing? Which market, again, in which segments? What is it that you're doing? What value are you creating that is so unique versus the competition that you win in a marketplace? Includes other aspects, in my definition, around what is the, not just the purpose. And in this day and age, people are very good at doubling down on purpose, and cynics, start with why. There's also what is the ambition. And what is very common is the ambition isn't actually stated. So in private equity backed businesses, often it is stated. but in many organizations, it's not. And so you find stakeholders and board members tearing themselves apart because they have their own definition of ambition. So it has to include ambition. It has to include the set of capabilities, and it's what Michael Porter calls the activity system. How do you configure your operating model and so just forget organization design, but what are the key capabilities? What are the key procedures and KPIs and things? The integrated system that you need that makes you unique and differentiated. For a strategy to be good, it has to be long lasting. And therefore you have to have barriers to others. And moats is a common phrase. But in this as well, something that's often forgotten is the economic engine. So Jim Collins in Good to Great talks about the economic engine, or the cash. How does a business generate cash? You need to be clear about how you make money and the economics and the economic engine. But often, and Richard Romwood, who's one of my favorite authors on strategy, he wrote Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. He talks about the crux. And this is probably the thing I struggled the most with. Like, what is the key challenge that you need to overcome? Often, actually, it's around what segment that you choose to prioritize on. But in some cases, it might be what ambition you're looking to shoot for. So, what is the key thing, the challenge you need to overcome? So those are it's a set of building blocks. I'm not going to read out my definition of the strategy. I think it's easier to read it, but it's got 8 elements in it. I have an acronym for each of those called PACTAC. I won't bore people with trying to remember another acronym that I've invented, but it's those are the key elements. And what you often see is critical parts of those elements are missing when people define a strategy. And what you very often see is someone creates a plan saying we need to do A, B, C in a spreadsheet. So there's a financial forecast and they call that a plan, and that is not strategy. So I think it's really important to understand what it isn't and kind of what it is.
I think I really enjoyed the part in the book where you talk about spreadsheet strategists and kind of, and I've been in situations like that where there's been a spreadsheet and it kind of creates this illusion of certainty, doesn't it? It's like, we've got a spreadsheet, the numbers add up. That's great, off we go.
Well, we just have to do that then.
Yeah.
If it was only so easy.
Yeah, well, you can make the numbers add up to whatever you like, can't you? It's like,
you can.
Happy days.
Yeah.
What's your hypothesis about, that definition of really understanding those building blocks of strategy? Why are organisations struggling with this? What's going on?
I think there's a lack of disciplined thought. And I think people are not prepared to sit back and think. I think there's also committees often make bad strategists.
Yeah.
And trying to get a group of people with different motivations and goals to come up with something, it also ends up in sort of vanilla. It's like written by committee. And so there's a set of challenges in actually creating a strategy it's genuinely unique and differentiated. I think to create something as well, Peter Thiel talks about this actually, and for it to be long lasting, it has to be genuinely differentiated and defendable. And that means you have to do things that people don't like admitting to. Like, you have to try and create monopolistic power to some extent. You need to create network effects. And there's a book called The 7 Powers, which is excellent. What is the angle that you have that you're going to create something? And often what people do is because they're so in love with benchmarking, they just copy what other people are doing. So, I think the automotive industry is classic in this. And early in my career, I did quite a bit of work in the automotive sector, and they just, BMW and Audi just look at each other. So you go in there and Audi says, well, what's BMW doing, and vice versa. When you're in Detroit, GM says, so what about Ford? And Ford says, what about GM? And Chrysler says, what about, and their cars even start looking like each other, everything. And so the benchmarking means, if you follow the benchmarks, and guess what, you're going to be average and you're going to be undifferentiated. So you need to have an insight into something, into a process, into the market, into a need. And so I think entrepreneurial businesses are often successful because there's a felt pain that someone has experienced that gave them an insight through experience, that gave them a hook to then create something that's fundamentally different. And the word different is important. Differentiate it, means different to everyone else. and the case studies people use are always the same. So you have Southwest Airlines as an example that kind of evolved out of necessity.
So as you were talking there, I was wondering, is there a challenge about who owns strategy, or is there lack of clarity in some organisations about who owns strategy? Like, is it the chief exec? Is it the board? Is it investors?
Well, in practice there is, but there shouldn't be. So I'm quite clear on this. The CEO owns the strategy. The board approves the strategy. Who owns the strategy is actually really, really clear. Fundamentally, it's the CEO. Too often the board believe they do. And the board's role has to be clarified, and very often this is an issue. So the board's there to approve the strategy, ask questions, kick the tires. So the CEO has to get approval from the board, and that's part of core governance. The CEO should use his or her management team to help pull the strategy together. But fundamentally, it's the CEO.
How do we sort that out? Because I think a lot of the organisations we work in, we see boards overextending in terms of kind of their roles. And it's really difficult, isn't it, to unpack that and work that through?
And particularly often with PE-backed, where there is a majority, then they feel they own the strategy because they have an investment thesis. But at the end of the day, it's, okay, you're the owner, you bought it for a reason and you have an investment thesis. And during that process, that is a key part of designing the strategy. But fundamentally, if you've got a CEO there, it has to be the CEO and you've got to back the CEO. Obviously, you've got veto over the strategy, so you have that control. But you're not there every day. You're oversight. And I think the other thing is, just because you have all the power in the world and because you've control, doesn't mean you know how to run a business. Let the professionals know how to run a business. And often there's too much second guessing and backseat driving. We talk a lot about delegation and accountability and empowerment, don't we? And say in the world of HR and how that motivates. And Daniel Pink's, 3 things that, mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So same is true for a management team and a CEO. And McKinsey actually wrote a very good book called CEO Excellence. And they did an analysis on what makes great CEOs. And, they did longitudinal analysis, very thorough. And there were basically 6 traits that they found. And trait number 1 was a CEO can, create, design, and define a really strong strategy. And actually, number 2 was org design. The rest, by the way, was manage the team, manage shareholders, manage yourself, external outs. So, but the 2 core fundamental roles of a CEO is the strategy, and then the org design plus the org in terms of talent and culture. That to me is very clear. The board we just need to educate board members, I think, and NEDs. I think when people have training on how to be a board member, if you've been a CEO and you become a board member, then you've got to realize you're in a different role. And a lot of board members will be former CEOs or current CEOs. And I know for myself, I've had to really bite my tongue and be disciplined when I'm on a board, not as the CEO. It's a different role.
It does happen because a lot of board members, they're very successful in their own context, aren't they? And they have a view on how things are. And you can actually often have it where the board will pull you in lots of different directions because each board member will have their own particular area of interest, won't they? Yeah. And there's only so much professional management time that can deal with all these requests.
100%. And that's also why with Ray is really 2 things. It's the strategy, but then through to the board pack and how boards work and operate. Because to me, there has to be a red line. Board meetings are often ineffective as well because they're too operational and too much in the detail. And it's like an extension of Exco, which, and even the COO running a business and some boards get down to like wanting to understand the performance of different individuals even. And so I think people, which is kind of an org design point, people need to know their roles and responsibilities. And also there's telling and there's coaching. There's questioning and helping. Those are 2 different things. And all too often, people start with opinions and they don't start with questions. And I think that's a fundamental thing in strategy design. It's a fundamental thing in management. But it's a fundamental thing for a board. And by the way, there are such things as bad questions. Like a recall question typically is not a great question. So if someone says, we've grown by 10% oh, how does that break down by market? Or what does that compare to last year? Or, which is the segment? You're just asking recall question after recall question. It's like a memory test for the CEO. So if we answer that question, what action comes out of it? Like, how is that going to lead to anything? And sometimes if people haven't spoken for a while, they feel the need to ask questions. So and you get them that is ream off questions, but how often are those questions good? So I think there's an art that needs to be learned by people just to ask good questions, which means to think. Now you're podcasters, so you ask questions in part for a living, right? And I think that's in part why podcasting is such a great forum, because you're asking people questions that makes them think. And guess what? They learn. One of my mentors, his name is Ian Cantor, and he was the founder of Investec. So he does everything through questioning and asking, and he's been trying to coach me to be better at this. It's a work on. I think it's something we can all get better at, but it's a very easy thing just to offer an opinion.
Particularly someone who, the fact that it is an example to all of us, isn't it? Like someone like Ian Cantor could easily tell and get a lot done because of the position that they hold, yet they still choose something that takes a little bit longer in the moment, but what it does, it expands thinking as well.
Yeah.
If boards do take that sort of position of asking these kind of sort of memory test questions, then the board meeting can become a performance where it's like, I've got to demonstrate I'm across the detail, whereas really the board is there to, expand, challenge and develop thinking, aren't they?
Yeah, and help be supportive. It should be strategic. It should be linked to the strategy, and it should be helpful. So if the CEO and management think, my God, I survived another one, at least that's fun. That's not great.
No.
And people say, it's very lonely to be a CEO, which is true in most cases. That's not great. Being a thinking partner. Why is it that so many CEOs, the coaching industry for CEOs is off the charts? I mean, the number CEOs there's a whole industry of mentors and coaching and everything else out there. So including down to their psychology and, dealing with all sorts of things. I mean, it's a bit of indictment really of a lot of boards, but it's not always true. I've been very fortunate to have some exceptional board members. I had Ian, my first chairman, Richard Thompson, who passed away a few years ago, sadly, was a phenomenal chairman and board member. And he had a series of disciplines that I only realized later how phenomenal they were. And he was very good at time. Most board meetings were an hour. He focused on the key issues. We had a meeting once a month and pre the board meeting, and we talked through the business and the issues, and then focused the board meeting on the issues. And that really helps. It helps as a CEO to see the wood from the trees, to step back and think. And so I think that's he would now be deep into his mid-80s, right? I mean, I think there's a slight discipline, dare I say it, that the old generation had sometimes that maybe we've unlearned. It's worth reflecting on.
I think one of the things I really enjoyed about your books was the importance of one pages. So you articulate that beautifully at kind of various levels, kind of the strategy and the planning processes. Can you just talk a bit more about the importance of one pages and that kind of real skill of being able to synthesize your intentions?
I mean, it's about clarity of thinking and having a good conversation. If you are flipping from page to page to page, say in a PowerPoint pack or something like that, or a board pack, it becomes a monologue and people become passive. To have a good conversation, you have to structure that conversation and focus. And so a one page gives you that. And it just anchors you. And there can be other detail, but it just anchors you. So an example of the one page, I love inventing acronyms, if you haven't gathered already. So one is called the POPE, which stands for Plan on a Page, which is just the whole plan on one page. But what that is it's the metrics. So what are the key metrics we want to achieve beyond just KPIs, but obviously the KPIs will be there. And where are you today? And then where do you want to be? We call them landmarks. So in the next, say, 5 years, the sort of within the horizon that you can foresee. And enterprise value will often be one of those metrics, revenue, profitability, these kind of things, but other things as well, like net promoter scores and employee churn. And so the broad spectrum, you break it into swim lanes. So what are the key lenses on the business? There can only really be 5. So what the other thing, a one page it gives you, it forces you to prioritize, because strategy is about prioritization, and this is and trade-offs, and also communication is about prioritization. And so it forces you, what are the key swings, what are the key metrics? I can only get so much on a page. You can only really get 20, at most 25 on at most, right? But even that, most people would argue is too many. And so where are you? What do you want to get? Then some stepping stones. What are the stepping stones on the way to that journey? Again, it's one page. You can only really have 2, maybe 3 at most, checkpoints. And then those have to be branded, because it has to be, you want to create an emotional connection. Call it out so you can all rally behind something and focus on something. And then what are the key initiatives? What are the initiatives you need to do? They're going to make a change, so between where you are to the next stepping stone and across the piece. And again, you can only have so many stepping stones and so many initiatives. So it's a focus. And, I was just reviewing, the plan of a French company a few days ago. And, the CEO and chair were just sort of struggling with momentum, and they weren't getting stuff done. And you can just count how many initiatives they have on. What are they trying to achieve? There's no way. There's just only, so it forces you to say, what are we going to do now? So that's an example of a one page. And then that one page should be dynamic. And another example is the CEO view. We call it the view from the bridge, but the one page summary at the beginning of a board pack. Now, what are the highlights? 3. People generally can only remember 3 things. That's why you have TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, like try and so it's just, there are these tricks in communication. So what are the 3 highlights, 3 lowlights? What are the 3 main issues we need to focus on, and what are the recommendations? So that on one page, and that really is the agenda for a board meeting. That is then the crux of all the conversations. Then for each of those you can dig deep, but at least everyone knows, okay, I know what the issues are. I know what you're recommending we do, or the options. I know where we need to focus. By the way, congratulations on these things. It's always good to sort of remind yourself of the success. So it's another example of a one page. It's just a discipline. It's something I learned a little bit from my management consulting days, and Barbara Minto, who's kind of the mother of communication in the consulting industry. She created the pyramid principle, and which is we were just all basically evaluated and trained on that principle, for days when we became a consultant. And it's like, tell them what you're going to tell them the answer, and then tell them why and break it down. This is how executives like to learn. So that's there, the one page. Board packs will often be in the hundreds of pages, and try to do that, or strategy pack and everything else. So it's just the distillation of thinking. And to the point earlier about disciplined thinking is about narrowing it down to succinct things that people can remember. It also adds communication to the organization, because you give everyone clarity.
This just benefits all the way down with this, isn't it? And I imagine it's quite a painful process, isn't it? Because we get emotionally connected to some of our priorities. It's almost like killing our babies sometimes, isn't it? It's like, but the actual output of the document is just shows how much work goes into it. And I imagine some organizations would be tempted to shrink the size of the font to get more priorities.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. The amount of detail that people love to put on a page, that doesn't count.
Yeah.
It doesn't count. It has to be legible. That's why there has to be white space. There was a thing, we know how to design a page. There's a Gestalt principle. Things have to be in proportion and easy to absorb. And CFOs are often the worst, I find. CFOs, they when they write their summary, all they do is you have a table of dense data and split in all sorts of ways, and then they rewrite the data that's there in, often 600 words on a page alongside other information. Take you half an hour to read the one page, and then know so what. It's good to have opinions in the right order, like why did this happen to that, or what are the key insights that you've taken away from this? What questions does this mean we need to dive into? So I don't see that from CFOs very often, and so there's a discipline of thinking, and just reporting on the weather doesn't really help that much.
One of the things you talked about earlier, you alluded to earlier, the fact that the strategy is dynamic, so it's not kind of a fixed document. A lot of things we see, kind of strategies get launched. It's a glossy PDF, and and then there's complaints. Well, as fast as we've launched a strategy, something's changed. There's something fundamentally flawed in that process, isn't there? When we've got to that point.
Thank you. It's a phenomenal, important point. It's not one and done. The strategy is evolving. It should be constantly live. And I think the great companies, you see how they evolve, you see how they go. And when you look back, it all makes sense, but they're evolving and evolving. I mean, AWS or Amazon is a phenomenal example of that. He had a very clear Bezos view of what he wanted to do, but it was when he saw Steve Jobs that he saw what he was doing with the iPhone. He thought of the Kindle, because he thought books would be dead. So he invented that. Then they had all these servers and everything else, and so they invented AWS, which generates more profit. So that it's constantly evolving. And they created methodologies, with backward thinking. So you write your press release and work backwards, and it's a one-page press release. Interestingly, famously, they do everything in Word, and they force you to read at the beginning of the document because people don't read. I mean, I made the joke at the beginning, like, you write the book and does anyone read it? I don't think many people read, and I wonder how often people actually just sit back and think. I'm always fascinated, like, by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, just how much time they spend reading. It's Buffett famously is like, all I do is read. I'm preparing myself to make 1 or 2 decisions a year, and so that level of reflectiveness, and the people I find the most impressive, they're just the voracious readers, and they're absorbing and life, and so then they have this body of knowledge, and so when the time comes to make that decision, see an insight, they have that. The brain's a muscle, so I think that's a big part of this. It's time, how you manage time, and having time for that, having time literally to read and to think and to chat and to talk. Some like strategy, it takes time and it takes iteration. It takes refinement. You can't get it in one go, and it's always on. It's never, because if you think it's done, it's wrong, because it needs refinement, because assumptions will be wrong, or you would have missed something. It's dynamic. Competitors are changing. The market's changing. Technology's changing. Everything's changing all the time. So you'll miss opportunities if you don't. And I think this is a big reason why, if you look at the number of organizations that go bust every year, it's about 10%. If you look at the average life of organizations, say in the S&P 500 or the Fortune 100, or it's gone down from 30 odd years to almost 15. It's almost halved in the last 20, 30 years. There's a reason for this. Yet people continue. So, and that's the role of a CEO, and that's the role of the people that are helping the strategic process. So if your CEO is too busy, you're in trouble. If your CEO is too inward focused, not out there with customers, not out in the market, you're in trouble, because it's an outwardly looking thing. Understanding your customers and your competitors is very, and that's the other thing, is I think people spend too much time on their internal processes, looking at those, rather than what do customers really think, and why are they buying, and what do they value, and who are they, and do we really understand them, and do we understand how they're evolving? So that muscle needs to be really created, and I think too many organizations just don't have that.
Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarises all of the key points? Us too, so we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter. The link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest From Pod to Practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback.
A critique of, for example, the HR profession is that we're too inward looking, but one of the things you sort of talk about is like how organizations differentiate themselves. You talk about value factors, and often the value factors are how we perceive them, but what you're talking about is actually it's what the customer determines as value as well. Could you just unpack that? Because we're really trying to encourage people to look outward and actually keep the customer in mind at all times.
Well, guys, you've really done your homework, I have to say. This is an absolute joy talking with you. You've ruined everything. So value factors. It was really inspired by Blue Ocean, and what are from the customer perspective, what do they value? Why are they buying? And what's going to make them buy A versus B, you versus someone else? It's distilling that down. What are the most important value factors? Again, it's about choice. So what you will often see is people pray and spray, right? It's just spray and pray. It's just like you just try everything and maybe one thing will hit. No, what specifically for your segment? And if it was Southwest, their segment was the driver, and there was in Texas, and how much did it cost to drive from, say, Houston to Dallas, and how long did it take? Right, we want to stop them driving and flying. So how do we make it cheap enough and easy enough and frictionless so they can come on, quick boarding, go? And that was that. If you're flying with NetJets, the opposite end, it's private. It's all about I can book a private jet anytime, fly anywhere. I've never flown on a private jet, but the champagne's there and the complete concierge service, and it's frictionless and it saves my time. Two very valuable businesses, totally different market segments, totally different value propositions, totally different value factors. When Continental tried to compete with Southwest, they mixed it up. They tried to compete there, but their whole business model wasn't born from what those value factors were. And so that it became uncompetitive. And so what you see with great businesses, they have very, very clear value factors that are defined from the customer perspective. We do this all the time at Arahi, we get management teams to try and list the value factors and then to score them. So we have different methodologies for how you rank, so you can get to a ranking of importance. Card sorting and A versus B testing and things like this. And you will just be, well, you won't be surprised, but it's still surprising how divergent the opinions are about importance. And then you interview customers and then get their views. And what it also tells you, if one group of customers value one set of value factors differently to another, that by definition is a different market segment. That's how you define a segment. And so if you've got two segments that are fundamentally want different things, you kind of have a choice. Which one do we focus on? Which one is more value? Where are we better? Where are we more differentiated? Again, versus the competition. Because how does the competition rate against those value factors? And what Blue Ocean, led, and you talk about, or white space, is can you configure a set of value factors that make you an N of one, that make you unique, that you don't have competition? That's really the ambition that place you want to try and get to, is we don't have competition because this set of value factors and therefore the set of capabilities of what we do is unique. And that then becomes a long-enduring. IKEA is a fantastic example of that, but there are others.
Yeah, and that kind of goes counter to how we're taught at college, isn't it? Which is we segment according to social demographics, don't we? Whereas you're saying no, it's a lot more precise than that.
Yeah. Well, social demographics you use as a proxy to try and understand that. So you might say, well, young people have less money, so are more cost conscious, or people who are wealthy want these things. So it's a crude way of trying to get to it. But the right way is to understand the customers, and then is there something from the demographic data that they have in common that you can use for targeting, so that you can get to that segment. But Volvo focuses on safety, and BMW drivers focus on the driving experience. The same demographic, just different value things that people are prioritizing. So Volvo is Volvo and BMW is BMW. They're both, premium cars, but they have a clear differentiation, at least on that dimension. So that's what you're trying to get to. And if all you do is ask these management consultants, benchmark me against X, Y, and Z, then guess what? You're just copying them. You'll be copying their value factors. It's not going to work.
And there's some really difficult discussions, isn't there, that kind of teams need to negotiate or navigate to kind of get to agreement on those things. They're not easy discussions.
You have to make a choice.
Yeah.
And Winston Churchill said you can please some of the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. You have to make a choice. You make a trade-off. What are we? Are we? If you're in the airline industry, are we the low cost, high turnaround, one SKU? That's the entire business model, and that's our segment. Or are we full service? It's about connectivity and you know, being a hub and connected and the business traveler. You know, that's another segment. So who is our segment? And how are we best for that? And how do we reach them? And you can't be all things to all people. And that's at the heart of it. And people are uncomfortable making that choice because they have their vested interest. And I think a really nice case study with this is Sony. So Sony had all the capabilities in the world to build the iPod. And they were actually presented with the idea of building the equivalent of the iPod. You know, Steve Jobs was not the first person to, you know, create songs on that disc format. And they rejected it. And it was rejected because their core capability was a slow-moving engine, little motor like that, you know, that did the cassettes. And they were the best in the world at that. And they had the Walkman. And they didn't realize, no, our business is portable music, branded portable, you know, Sony's phenomenal brand, all the rest of it. They could have owned and dominated that industry. They didn't. It was internally driven. Nokia knew 2 years in advance what Steve Jobs and Apple were doing. And they had so many different business divisions and units, so many vested interests wanting different things. They organizationally could not react. They just couldn't respond. And the rest is so. These things are absolutely known, and so it's the internal. That's where your design gets in the way, and your structure gets in the way of strategy. And I think, you know, you said at the beginning, what drives what? I mean, it's 100% clear in my mind. Strategy drives structure, not the other way around. You know, it's not the tail wagging the dog. And so you've got to be clear on the strategy and on these questions. Everything deductively then follows from there. I think there's speed of change. So let me give you a perspective on speed of change. It doesn't change that fast in the near term. We think things are going to change way faster in the next year or two than what happens in reality. So we overestimate the speed of change in the near term, and we underestimate it in the long term. So in a 10-year time horizon, the level of change is profound, and that has been true since the end of the Industrial Revolution. So just reflect what life was like in 1900 versus 1920. In 1900, there was no electricity. Everything was horses. No one had flown yet. People were almost entirely rural, very poor, in the Western world, extremely poor. You know, actually, New Zealand, interesting, was extremely wealthy relative to the rest of the world back then. And in 1920, cars had taken over. The term jaywalk, I just learned this recently, was developed by the automotive industry in the 1920s. A jay was an ignorant person who didn't understand anything. And it was an advertising campaign to stop people crossing the road, because when there were horses, you could just walk around, and with cars, you couldn't. So they had a whole advertising campaign to basically convince people you just can't cross the streets anymore, so cars could move. And then jaywalking came into account, and now there's a law in America that is against jaywalking. So between it's just profound in that 20 years. Now, if you would have lived from 1902 to 1904, not much changed. Well, obviously there was the First World War, and that had a huge impact on everything as well. And the Spanish, but it's just, Richard Rome would say, more change between 1870 and 1920 than between 1970 and 2020. So AI is everyone talks about it. AI is profound. It's going to have a huge impact. The impact will be greater than we expect. All cars will be self-driving. But we'll be talking about self-driving cars for a very, very long time. But eventually it happens. If I'm doing any concentration work, I spend all my time now using AI. Like, AI is now part of how I do work. But it just takes time, but the impact is bigger. And so people get overly nervous in the near term. But that also, I think, creates a sense of inertia, because if you don't do it, because you survived the year, the forecast didn't happen this year or next year. So then you think, it's not going to happen. But it really is.
So because you work with private equity as well. And there's always that, and growth is the driver. And we hear this a lot in organizations about how to get the pace of growth right. And so, for example, a few weeks ago, we were sort of with an organization, they just released their strategy, and they agree in principle that these are all good ideas, but the rate of growth, the people within the organization don't feel as if they've had time to consolidate the growth to date. Is that a failure of strategy, that, people's perspectives aren't being updated, or that?
It's probably more a failure of planning and execution. So that, you need a good strategy, but you also need great execution. Like, both things have to be true. Without a great strategy, you're not going to succeed. But if you have a great strategy without execution, you're still not going to succeed. Like, both things have to be true, and which is why it's so difficult. So I'm personally a big believer in consolidation. I'm a big believer in slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Foundations sometimes need to be put in place. Sometimes go and put foundations in later, but trying to do both simultaneously is difficult. The key thing is focus is the key word. Getting things, nothing better than getting something done and just saying, wow, we had a start, we worked, it was harder than we thought, and we got it done. Now let's move on to the next thing.
And what was some of your experience of with, like, for example, with OrgView? Because you got product market fit, which is the holy grail, isn't it? And then things really took off really quickly. What were some of the lessons that you learned from that other organizations can take from that?
So it's always way harder than you think. It takes longer than you think. If you're the entrepreneur, so if it's an entrepreneur listening, you have this unfortunate tendency of being overly optimistic. That is your superpower. As long as you've got the resilience to deal with the disappointment of being wrong all the time until you're right. You just have to stick with it, because it just takes longer. It takes longer to build the product. It takes longer to get the message out there. As good as you think your product is, you have to refine it. And I mean, some of the things that we did, just really silly things that you didn't think about at the beginning. So I'll give you an example, and it's so obvious. It's like, well, why didn't we think about that? Is we had the first org chart, and you couldn't change the order of the notes. And our first client, which actually happened to be in San Francisco, really cool client. I was really so chuffed to get them. They're like, yeah, this is amazing. They loved it. Like, I just want to change the order. And I'm like, oh my God, the order is obviously important. Like, the order you put things. And so, okay, it didn't take as long to make that change, but you need that kind of feedback. And there's a paradox here, because if you only listen to the feedback of the customer, then Henry Ford then said, if I ask them what they want, they'll have a faster horse. Steve Jobs famously didn't believe in market research. There is a walking set. So people listen to this, they say, he is contradicting himself the whole time. And that is true. There's a set of paradoxes that you have to manage. Both things have to be true simultaneously. You have to have your, Richard Thompson always said to me, you have to have your head in the clouds and your feet on the ground. Like, you have to be crazily ambitious and thinking, disrupting the world and changing the world, but you've got cash flow and payroll to meet, and you just need to, so both things are true. And that was very much my experience with OrgView. It was certain things was just like silly. And I also, another example, you think you're one and done, you think it's working. So we had this, the scale of our clients were much bigger than I expected. So I believed that we would have our initial clients would all be sort of sub 10,000, 20,000 employees. Didn't see that the huge organizations in the world would want to OrgView. And so very quickly, large organizations wanted, and then they wanted, again, one page. They wanted to see the entire organization on one page. So 200,000 nodes on a single page, viewed in an icicle or some, I just didn't see that. Again,
I would have loved to have been in the taxi on the way home from that sales meeting.
It sort of crept up, and it was like, oh my goodness. And so it was like, we had to redevelop like the layout algorithms, but then compression. So we use an off-the-shelf compression algorithms. When you're moving the data from, say, the client site to our servers, there's a compression algorithm. I didn't know there was a compression algorithm. I didn't even know what that was. It was not a thing. And then all of a sudden we had a very large, FTSE 20 client. This is quite early on. and they couldn't get the data into OrgView. I'm like, what? And this was and I sold them on when I turned 40. That was literally my 40th birthday was when they agreed to come up. So it was a very nice day. And then the next day, the data didn't come across. I'm like, huh? So then we had to scramble and build a compression algorithm that was native to OrgView. Like, that was not on the roadmap. We built that. It was very stressful at the time. Never thought about it again. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of, it was a Rommel who said there's the knowables and known knowns, known unknowns, and unknowables, unknown unknowns. And there's a lot of unknown unknowns. And so when you're building and it's that phase, so you can have all the plans and you can have all the strategy and all of that's intact, but you just have stuff that just hits you. And so how you deal with that, and again, prioritize. It's all about prioritize, how you prioritize time. How you've only got, most organizations have got finite resources. So there are some exceptions, and they're all in Silicon Valley and they're all worth about 4 trillion. But beyond those, we all have finite resource. At a point in time, you have to, the word is pivot. It's not so much pivot, it's pause certain things to redirect energy to get something done to then go back to. And that's just the nature of life. That's why planning, as we said, strategy is always on, planning is always on.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic plan, which is why the spreadsheet is so dangerous, because it's the spreadsheet, as you said, Danny, it's like one view of reality into the future, where every single number is locked. There's no spread of anything. The world's never like that. So so what do you need? A lot of it is just like good old fashioned just resilience. You just got to work through these things and these unexpected hits. But then those things also become a feature as well often, right? So now, guess what? OrgView has this ability to move huge swathes of data and model at scale. It's the only platform, as far as I know, in the world that can model an entire organization at that kind of scale and through that kind of change. So when you're trying to get to product market, we'd already achieved product market fit at that stage under the classic definition. So the classic definition is 1 million of revenue, over 20 customers is kind of the definition in the world of SaaS. So we're beyond that point, but it's like getting to the point of scalability and where you've got a platform that, can generally go, there's so many of these things that you just have to get through.
During that time when we don't know, the software is being tested in ways you never knew possible, you're having to invent and build and you're constantly throwing huge challenges at the team because and it's mind bending, isn't it? At speed as well. How do you keep the team together? Because it's easy to fragment, and how do you keep that sort of common sense of all pulling in the same direction? This is hard, but we've got to keep going.
I think it's easier in those earlier days. You have this feeling of sort of band of brothers type feeling, like we're all in this, it's us. You don't have all these structures in place that get in the way. It's harder when you become successful because, professional managers come in, professional processes, egos. There's a risk of, and again, this is a Warren Buffett thing, hiring mercenaries, not missionaries. You want an organization of missionaries. People are on the mission. That's a type of person that's just mission driven. And when you become really successful, you attract mercenaries. They see the shiny, they see the success, they want to be part of it. And so I think that early phase was not a challenge because that's what people want to come to work for. They want to be that. And because you're small, there's not as much falling through cracks because of, through interfaces and communication, that the team's small, a lot of the knowledge is in a few people's heads, which isn't scalable, but is what works, which is why, startups and early stage businesses have a chance. It's why, the concept of skunk works was created by Lockheed Martin. So just having a small group of people go and do this thing over here and disrupt and work in a self-contained way, limited budget, small team. That's why that works. So and that's why, organizations around the world are trying to adopt agile principles. But that is really what that is about. It's about iteration, being able to do it's small teams, and you have, can you feed, the whole team with 2 pizzas, and all those principles are born from that. And large organizations try to find ways to, emulate that. Most unsuccessfully, but, some do.
I just want to come back to something you said just a little while ago about the importance of pausing stuff. It's something we see not enough organisations doing. They add priorities at the top, add and add and add, and they don't ever pause or stop stuff. And the kind of the implications of that for the rest of the organisation are really significant, aren't they?
We have it on from the Pope. You have the initiatives, and we have a list. So it's an idea. It goes onto the backlog. It gets prioritised. It gets started. These are the stages. Some get stopped, but some are rejected. Some just get paused. Just pause. It doesn't. So pause is different to stop, because pause is like, we're coming back to this. We just can't complete it right now because this has come up and we need to put our attention here. And it's just really healthy to say, what are our list of paused initiatives? And also, what are our list of stopped or rejected, right? What have we decided not to do? Again, choice. You have to make these decisions in these trade-offs. You can only do so much, and can only do so much within the time constraints. And there's the golden triangle of quality, time, and cost. 9 pregnant women can't have a baby in a month. They're just laws of physics. It's just, so you just have to be mindful of this. And critical resources, like, you might not have the capability to do it. So you might pause because we just don't know how. We need to get a supplier to help us or to hire. Yeah. Or it's like in the instance of that compression thing, this is mission critical. We have to get this sorted. We have to pause these other elements. And it might only be for 2 weeks, right, while we sort that. And that's back to the point about team, or the question about team. That's galvanizing as well. It's, okay, we've paused. We're on this. Now we're back. But the other thing, in terms of managing developers, one thing I've learned is context switching and zigzagging too much and pivot is also really, really disruptive, because they want to sit down, work on something and get it live. And so people have this idea that you're constantly pivoting and switching. It should not be like that, because the cost of switching is huge, and context switching and all that. So I think people can hear a story like I just said and think, so every week we're pausing, and no, that's chaos. That's again, these paradoxes or contradictions. This is why I've written in the book, like, all these series of contradictions and paradoxes that you have to manage.
There was one thing that I remember reading the book really struck me, and it was about objective setting and where it sits within the organisation. You had a very strong view it shouldn't sit with HR, and I thought that was really powerful and probably worth us unpacking, because I think a lot of the people listening will be kind of in that space in HR where they've kind of been given the kind of objective setting and performance management. So just talk a bit more about that for us.
Yeah. So it should come from strategy and then the plan. So it all cascades from that. And it's teams that deliver outcomes. Even a salesperson, like the most objective thing is sales reps and quota attainment. But, they're really reliant on how good is lead generation and marcoms, how great is the product, how good the pre-sale support, how great are the references. You as a salesperson, you're really, yes, you have a big influence, but you're really also dependent on a lot of things, and particularly things that are important, multidisciplinary. So that is one reason that by allocating objectives to the personal level, you're creating silos. And people, if you just focus people on a set of metrics, set of outcomes, they will only manage that, and they won't think about the organization. So you get what you measure. The other thing is people talk about performance for pay and what have you, and then simultaneously they talk about development and talent management. And if you are setting it from an HR perspective, what you're really doing is you're negotiating someone's reward and bonus and how they're going to get promoted. And so what you're doing is you're pre-negotiating. So if I'm going to negotiate with you my pay based on an outcome, I'm going to negotiate that outcome as low as possible. So I'm shooting for the bottom that I can achieve, and that then becomes a zero-sum game type negotiation. So trust is being eroded and broken. Also, if I'm doing bottom up, people are picking their pet projects and what they want. So we're going in all directions then, and it doesn't focus on development. And we all want to get better and perform and, love our work. And we love our work, back to, Daniel Pink, if we have the competence to be excellent at achieving the purpose and that autonomy to do what we're doing, well, then how am I going to help you be amazing? How am I going to help, I'm going to love strength-based management and amplifying people's strengths. And so it's the combination of strengths. So how do you identify, okay, these are the strengths, okay, these weaknesses, how can we compensate for those or just make them not even relevant rather than always try, and then really amplify this and then improve. So to me, it should be about development. And but you have to make a choice. It's either about pay and reward and negotiating or development. Because if and you have to make that choice. And to me, HR should be help finding, not just get the best talent, but optimize the talent you have to then help with that execution. And at the end of the day, life is so short. So make it enjoyable, make it fun. That helps enormously. So that's why. And I think almost everywhere, I think HR is doing this the wrong way, and it being set up for failure as well. But I think HR needs to be braver. I find HR is not brave enough at saying, no, if we do this doesn't work. Like, I think a lot of these things are understood, but they're kind of almost order takers too often. And then they complain why they don't have a seat at the table. Well, if you're an order taker and you're just doing this, then kind of don't deserve one.
We're going to make sure that's rewound and played on a loop in perpetuity, because HR is at a strategic inflection point right now, isn't it? And it really needs to be at the vanguard of change as well. There are so many questions we want to ask you, like your hatred of racy, and there's an alternative to it. The fact that all businesses are technology businesses, one person's handoff is another person's output. There are so many questions we want to ask, and potentially we'd love you to get you back for a round two, but we always try and finish with the three similar questions. So one question, you're incredibly well read, and that comes out really loud and proud in the book, Strategic Value Creation. How does a person who's so intensely busy with so many different interests and on such a growth trajectory, how do you find time and how do you invest in your own learning and development?
Well, the first thing to say, I don't read nearly as much as I would like to, but and then it's just making time. I mean, I creating time. So often it's the mornings. I either try and train, work out, or do work in the mornings, and then read is a thing. For Strategic Value Creation, I read over 50 books in quite a short period of time. I was just reading every morning ferociously, and then in the tube as well. I don't have I'm lucky I don't have a long tube journey. It's less than 15 minutes, but if you can read, 12, 13 minutes, and you'd be surprised how that kind of all adds up. So I think, holidays and I think Bill Gates, when he takes 2 weeks a year, he goes away to a cabin somewhere just on his own with I don't know how many books and just reads them. So that's how he does it.
Could you just tell my partner that? She's just got the kids for a couple of weeks.
Yeah. But just making time and prioritizing that. You've got to enjoy it as well, right? But what I found as well is because often when I'm reading, I'm also reading with a purpose. That helps. So then all of a sudden, when I was reading, writing Strategic Value Creation, I became a little bit manic with reading. But I would also reread. Some books I reread 5 times. Richard Rumel's book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. I didn't get it. Probably the first 2 times through, I didn't fully understand it. And I was really frustrated. And I couldn't get what he meant by the crux question. And it took me a long time to understand that. So it's just rereading and writing a lot in books. For me, I need a physical book because I have to write notes and underline, and then I reread those. And I know, again, and I just find not being digital. Believe it or not, I wrote my books by pen and paper because for me, it's that tactile, it's that experience. It's different. I'm a big believer in whiteboards and spending time in a whiteboard, because on a whiteboard, it's democratizing. There's no hierarchy when you're physically standing, which is a different energy, and you're just working through things.
I'd echo. I was because I'm a writer and an annotator and all of that stuff. I've been reflecting on kind of the use of AI and AI note taking, and it's not doing it for me. If I'm on a research call or a focus group, I need to write the notes myself, and I need to write them up myself, because that kind of sense making part of it doesn't happen if you're just relying on AI to do it for you. So
and you have to make those connections. Not the AI agent. You can use the AI, phenomenal for summarizing X, Y, and Z. It'll do it. It's a new little brain. We've got all these. It's a neural network, isn't it? And you just got to create these connections.
And is there a particular book that sticks out, or a book or a podcast or a resource that's stuck with you you'd recommend to others read?
Yeah, I mean, it changes. So the podcast I listened to the most when I was writing strategic value creation was called Founders. And that I just absolutely loved. And there were lots of books in that I read. And you know, including one about like how bananas, Joe the Banana Man, and like how he came about, and that whole thing was just nuts to me. And how this one guy suddenly took over like one of the largest businesses in the US, bananas, and how that whole thing evolved. So that podcast I found, and now I'm on to another one, which is, it's kind of like on steroids. It's like 5 to 6 hours per episode, and it's called Acquired, and they just go really deep into an organization and how it was founded and worked through. And it's really enlightening, when, particularly from a strategy development perspective, like you can really see how they create. And my favorite podcast on that was Hermes. Like I don't know anything about retail really, or fashion. Like I don't care about clothes. I just wear t-shirts. I hear it's just mind-boggling, and how counterintuitive that entire organization is. It's all about craft, and they take days to build a bag, and how the whole thing just comes about. And you know, they have, I think 90-ish% of all craftsmen in the world are like work for this one organization. They train them for years, and rural parts of France, and just the level of detail and timelessness of what they create, and how the whole customer experience and all of that. So that was from Acquired. And you know, these guys, I mean, similar to you, they just research like crazy, and then they just, you know, you get that. So those are podcasts I absolutely love. If you want to read one book on strategy that isn't mine, I would go for Richard Rummel's Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. I would say you're probably not going to get it all in one go, at least unless maybe you're smarter than I am. But that's, I find a lot of business books have one or two ideas, and then that's it. I didn't find that to be true, and I think he really helped. It's what I observed myself, but he really articulated well how prevalent bad strategy is, and being able to call it out, I think, is really useful.
Brilliant. And then the last question we want to ask you is, what advice would you give someone who's just starting out in strategy? So they're just sort of taking their first steps. They've listened to the podcast today. They've understood the importance of it. They understand that they need to be a strategist to make a dent in an organization and in the world as well. What advice would you give them to start out? And you're very welcome to signpost them to your book as well.
I think you've done the signposting my book already, but thank you. It's think about the questions you ask. You know, be outward. Think about the customer. Think about the competitor. So outward focus. Get the elephant on the table. So trade-offs on which segment do we focus on? Trade-off on what's really the ambition that we're trying to achieve here. Let's be honest about that. And I had one client actually really successful, and they believed that they had to just grow and start opening offices up around the world. And when I was really trying to unpin the ambition, turned out they just wanted a lifestyle business, and they just wanted to be friends, and actually they just wanted to celebrate together on a beach in 5 years' time. And it was just like, it was almost the expectation of society or the industry was you open offices. And I'm like, why are you doing this? What's the ambition? And then they were literally about to sign stuff in Germany and what have you, and they just stopped the whole thing. I just get this on the table. You know, sometimes people just don't even realize what they're doing, why they're doing it. So if you're starting out, just ask, one thing. One thing is just ask good questions.
Well, Rupert, we just want to say a huge thank you. We've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. It's taken a long time to organise it. So thank you so much for making time for us as well. It's been just thoroughly enjoyable. It's brought so many different things. It's like the big picture, the craft of strategy, the precision that's required, the clarity, the discussions, the different perspectives that it brings into as well. So we really do recommend the books. We've totally devoured them. We've really enjoyed them as well. Danny, what are you taking away from today's conversation?
I think it's hard to do it justice in a couple of points, but I think, some of the things that have stuck with me are kind of the importance of starting with questions, not opinions. I think, if we could just adopt that as a mantra in our organisations, that would be huge. The importance of great strategy and great execution, and a lot of those paradoxes that you talked about is not either or, it's and. You have to do both. And the importance of choice, I think, kind of was a thread throughout. You have to make difficult choices at all, at all times and all to get the clarity and the focus that you need to succeed.
And you've taken some of mine there, but if I had to add the power of pauses and being really explicit and the rationale and the logic behind it, that it's not a bad thing. And missionaries, not mercenaries. That's such an important element as well. Rupert, if people want to follow your extensive work, you have a brilliant podcast that I've completely devoured as well. How can people follow your work and keep up to date with what you're doing?
Yes, I have a podcast on org design called Unpacking Organisations, which has been a lot of fun. I'm not being as active posting or what have you at the moment with regards to the work I'm doing with the Rahi, because I'm just at the scaling phase, and so we have clients live and it's going really, really well, and with the feedback's been phenomenal. But making it work with small number of clients to a large number is kind of the phase we're in. So I'm probably not being as prolific as maybe I need to start upping my game a little bit, but there's always a phase for doing things. So I'm on LinkedIn, and I would say to your listeners, feel free to link in with me. And then, the thing that gives me the greatest joy is when people read the books and give some comments, say, well, this is what they found useful, and how it helped them. So those are probably the best ways.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Rupert. For those that are watching this, what we always get so impressed is the number of shares. So people, if you're watching this and you think someone who's strategically lost, or is in HR and they're wondering why they're not at the top table, then please share this with them. We just get so many shares every week, and if you enjoyed it, the algorithm gods love it if you like and subscribe as well. But most importantly, thank you so much, Rupert, for making time. We know you're so busy, but we've absolutely loved it. It's lived up to all our expectations and beyond as well. So thank you, Rupert.
Well, totally my pleasure, and thank you for your amazing questions. It was a total joy to discuss them with you.